ride in your own ride. When I say ride in your own ride, what do I mean by that? Well, that's a phrase that I learned from my dad, who is perhaps one of the best sport touring motorcyclists on the planet, just because of the amount of hours that he's put in doing hundreds and thousands of miles sport touring across the United States and the Alps and Europe. And he's really an enthusiast in that sport. And actually was pretty high up in motorcycle racing with different kind of enduro racing and things like that. So he's very knowledgeable when it comes to motorcycling and specifically sport touring. Now, one of the unique things about sport touring, and I've done a little bit of it, but I'm not even an amateur at it, but I know some things about it, having been a motorcyclist myself. But one of the unique things about it is it's actually very dangerous, aside from the normal things of getting in wrecks with motorcycles, being that you're not protected, you're in exposed environment, not in the cage, as motorcyclists like to call it, speaking about cars or trucks, you're in a cage. Well, you could get hit by another car. I mean, if that happens, it's probably lights out for you. But there's other things beyond that when you're doing sport touring, because sport touring is all about the curves. It's all about going and gripping the curve as you go around the corner and taking that motorcycle way down low to where even sometimes, you can scrape the pegs. That's kind of like a badge of honor. And the sport touring guys will judge other motorcyclists by their wear tread on their tires. In other words, if they take a look at your tire and they see that the side of the tire is not worn and that you just got a flat up and down wear mark on your tire, they know that you're an amateur motorcyclist. I mean, these guys who just, like Harley riders, basically, who just go straight, and they don't really know how to lean the bike down, basically because Harleys aren't made for that. A guy who's a sport touring guy who maybe rides a BMW brand, or he rides a Ducati, or he rides something that's more in line with, carving up those corners. They look at guys who just have the straight up and down wear mark on the tires as wannabes. They call them squids. Guys who are just wannabes. They're not real motorcyclists. They just like the idea of being on a motorcycle. They go straight up and down on the highway or around town. They don't use the bikes in a sport capacity. Well, one of the things about riding your own ride, which is something that you say a lot in sport touring parties, where they go on a long track, they're going to go hundreds of miles that day. They're going to ride typically in the mountainous areas or on the foothills where they can get a lot of curve action in. We're on the side of a mountain and there are no guardrails. I mean, you go wide, you die. You come in too fast to that corner and you can't lay that bike down, you die. If you go off the cliff, you die. Well, this can even happen if you're not on a cliff. If you just come in the corner too fast, you don't know how to lay the bike down. In other words, lean real hard, you die because you crash off into a tree. So it's very dangerous. So one of the things they say in sport touring is to ride your own ride. And the reason you do this is because if you don't, you can die. If you're following the guy in front of you, because you guys are together, most often people who engage in this sport, they do it in groups. So if you're riding the ride of the guy in front of you, you could slip up. You come into the corner too fast. You don't know what was in front of him. You don't know how his machine works or how he does it or what he's going to do. Maybe he's going in too fast. And if you do what he does, you screw around and you both die, or you get in a wreck and you pile on top of him. You ride your own ride. And the rule is when you're sport touring that the guy who's in front of you, if he gets out too far ahead, he'll just wait for you. If he loses sight of you, when he gets too far away, he'll just wait. There's no need for you to rush or for him to slow down. Everyone rides their own ride because the price of not doing so is too high. It's someone's life or someone get crippled or something like that. So whenever you start your ride, everyone says, hey, ride your own ride, be safe, let's go have fun. So you ride your own ride because if you don't, You could go into the corner too fast. Maybe this guy you're following, somebody like my dad who could carve up the corners really, really good and do it fast. But he's been riding since he was a kid. He's got hundreds of thousands of miles on a motorcycle under him. He's basically, a professional at it and knows everything about motorcycles there is to know. Well, that's not true of me, but I could be an ambitious guy and we want to stick together. And so I follow him and I end up dying. So you don't want to do that. Everybody, regardless of skill level, maybe you're as skilled as the next guy, you ride your own ride. Because to not do so doesn't take into account the other person's machine, the other person's skill level, something that may have darted out in front of them or is going to dart out in front of you, such as an animal or a piece of gravel or whatever. You guys don't have the same ride. Two people do not have the same ride. Well, this is true of life. You have to ride your own ride. Because if you compare yourself with somebody who's in your area of expertise or a coworker or somebody you know or a friend, you compare yourself to them, you set yourself up for failure even if you beat them. What do I mean by that? Well, everybody has their own machine. I'll break that down even further. We all have different genetic dispositions, proclivities, propensities, liabilities, assets that we're born with. Some of us are born being more athletic than others. Some of us are born smaller, bigger, stronger, faster, different intelligence levels. Well, if you compare yourself with somebody who's, let's say, genetically in the area that you guys are competing in, that you see the apparent competition in, and they're genetically inferior to you, you lose because you're not judging yourself correctly because you're judging yourself with somebody who's weaker than you. And that's not the only thing to consider. Another thing to consider is their upbringing. What kind of resources did they have as a child? What were they taught? Maybe they were taught a certain skill. They were raised a certain way that gave them a disadvantage to you because you were raised a certain way, gave you an advantage. So now you're comparing yourself with someone, they're not starting at the starting line with you. They're starting way back and you're starting way ahead of them. So when you beat them, it's not like a big victory. Of course you beat them. So you're not even comparing yourself accurately to someone. And these are things that you can't necessarily know on a surface level. You don't know their DNA. You don't know how they were raised. Also connections. You don't know who they know and who they're connected with. You don't know these things. Everybody has their own ride. So when you compare yourself with somebody and you get into this competitive spirit, which isn't necessarily inherently bad, but on the real level, the true level, you're really at a competition with yourself. Because when you seek perfection, you seek an impossible goal. And the standard, you're giving yourself a standard by comparing it to something else, or else you wouldn't have a point of reference. As a matter of fact, that's how we think, by comparative analysis. So this idea of perfection that you have, you learn from some other place. And since you're doing that, you're ipso facto comparing yourself to someone or something else. And for you to do that is a standard of impossibility because you're not somebody else. You have your own DNA. You have your own set of assets and liabilities that are completely different than anybody else on the entire planet. So for you to compete with somebody else on a micro level, and even on a large degree, a macro level, is to set yourself to automatically lose. Well, what you want to do is you want to compete against yourself because that's a fair fight, right? So what you do is you try to be better than you were yesterday. And that's a real thing. You try to push yourself beyond your best. That's why I always say, and I tell all my kids, do better than your best. Because that's when you grow. That's how you compete accurately. Competing against yourself. When you do better than your best, you've just increased your level of competency. So you're not comparing yourself with somebody else or this image that you have that you've created through movies or people that you've known. You're not doing that. You're comparing yourself with who you were yesterday by doing better than your best, finding your level of quit inside of you. There was a rule called the 40% rule made up by retired Navy SEAL David Goggins, who says when you're wanting to quit, you're actually only at 40% of your max. So whenever you feel like you can't go anymore, you want to quit, you're only at 40%. And that's now a rule that the Navy SEALs have adopted in their BUDS training and their subsequent PT. And when they're training, you're only at 40% because they've proven that you have so much more in you than you think you do. So when you do better than your best, you're going past your 40%, and you're tapping into that level of your tank that only comes through extreme exertion and exhaustion, because you have so much more in there that you probably never even tapped into because you're competing against the wrong people, competing against the wrong person. The competition is with yourself. That's the competition. And you have to ride your own ride. When you're trying to follow in somebody else's footsteps, it's going to cost you your life by way of you not manifesting your own unique potential. Go out there, ride your own ride. Marin Janx, I'm here to help you, here to support you. Over and out.